Okay, here we are. I just want you to know, I'm sure Karen has explained to you in this situation how we have really extended ourselves to try to get this teaching to you tonight. And if you've ever felt, if Nighttime Study has ever felt like the redheaded stepchild, today is proof in the pudding that you absolutely aren't. So she's explained to you that I'm in this room by myself, and I hope that what I have to say will touch your heart and speak to you in a way that only the Holy Spirit could, despite where I may be mentally trying to get this teaching to you when I could not be here tonight. Okay, so we're covering the introductory in chapters 1 through 3. I think I've told you a friend of mine was played a big part in us doing this book, and she gave me the study in the book. She is in the study and in the book. But she told me, she's like, you know, you don't need this book really because you could write it. And I want to tell you that I dug into this book on an airplane with my daughter, and I was super glad that my daughter was there with me, someone who gets me, knows me, and has lived with me for 22 years. You know, she didn't used to get me, but she gets me now. Because we were shocked at the similarities and the parallel things in the book that have gone on in our lives and my life as well. Starting with the very first section where her parents are building this volleyball court, and they say, if you build it, they will come. And that is from a famous baseball movie, but oddly enough, many of you may know that that's what we used to say about this pool house. As we were planning the pool house, dreaming about the pool house, and having Imago Dei in this space, we often said, if you build it, they will come. And so that has obviously come to fruition. I want to put at the forefront of our minds something she says in the introduction, and it's these words: a smiling face and a heart of welcome. A smiling face and a heart of welcome. That is what we're looking at. That is what we're aiming towards. When we're talking about biblical hospitality, I want that to be on the front of everything that we're thinking about, and as we're moving through life while we do this study. Have that pondering and contemplating in the back of your mind, a smiling face and a heart of welcome. So she talks about her family's motto, and I think her parents' family's motto. And the Parker family has also had a motto that I have told y'all about before. It hangs in my family room in our main house. And truly I say to you that this has been something that I decided was our creed and how we would try to live our lives as the Parker family. And this is how it goes. I didn't make this up, but when I heard it for the first time, I adopted it to be our family's motto. Live in such a way that those who know you and don't know God will come to know God because they know you. And we have shared that philosophy with so many people who have come through our doorsteps. We've often shared it with non-believers when they talk to us about our faith, that this is really what we want to do, is to be relational and to live in such a way that those who don't know God, and you may be in my home, or I may see you on a soccer field or in the grocery store, but that you don't know God, but that you will come to know God because you know me, you know my family. So we will learn in our study that hospitality has the power to change a generation. Hospitality has the power to change a generation. And what a concept that maybe you've never even thought about in terms of biblical terms. And I have lately had the grand opportunity to talk to a lot of millennials. I don't even know really what a millennial is or where millennial starts and where it ends. But just think about a generation of people and how you right now, whether you are 20 or whether you're 50, that you have the ability in your biblical hospitality to change a generation. We're going to turn to page 3 as we start. And this is what she says she has seen hospitality be able to do. She says, I've seen friendships formed, relationships restored, outsiders welcomed, and the gospel come to life. That is what can happen when you take on what hospitality truly means and what the scriptures call us to do in terms of hospitality. And on page 4, in that section, we are encouraged, so this is kind of the creed that she's giving us as we start off, is to toss any preconceived notions aside. Throw out your magazines, cast aside the apprehension, and look at how Jesus molded this life of welcome. Oh dear, my notes are out of order. So, in chapter 1, How many of us can relate to her definition or her acronym of chaos? I've told you, and you heard in our introduction time 2 weeks ago, but you probably know if you've known me, if you've come to Imago Dei, that this doesn't tend to be my issue. But we're going to talk about what my issue is and how this book is affecting my heart. But she says that chaos stands for can't have anybody over syndrome. Can't have anybody over syndrome. So yeah, that's not my struggle. Letting others come into my chaos actually is a pretty easy thing for me to do. I have that gift. In fact, I've often told you and told people the way I deal with you coming into my chaos is I just tell you, please don't call me. Just stop by. Come by my house at any time, morning, day, or night. You are welcome in my home, but don't call ahead. Now, don't get me wrong, I like to have play dates planned and dinner parties and things that are scheduled. But then if you call me and say you're going to stop by, I feel like I've got to sweep, I've got to get the dishes out of the kitchen sink and all those things. So I figure if you just stop by, I can just apologize and say, oh, I'm so sorry, since I didn't know you were coming, I didn't clean. So anyway, it's just a joke that we have around here about just stop by, don't call. But we will also learn in our study that it's not necessary to constantly apologize for life happening in our world and for the chaos that we have. And in fact, I was fortunate enough that these thoughts were fresh on my mind when our plane landed in Florida and I got to see a cousin of mine. Like y'all, many of you may have cousins. I grew up with my cousins on both sides of my family. They were like sisters and brothers. We visited a lot, even if we've lived in separate states. We, just really grew up together. But as we got to be adults, we just don't see each other as often. And so I cherished that time. I had never been to this cousin's house. Her parents live close by where she lives, and they have a large, old plantation home in Florida. And so we always just stay at their home when we go down there. So because we were going to be at the University of Florida, I had the opportunity to visit her in her home. So we go in her house. Mind you, I've just read these first 3 chapters, and her garbage disposal has exploded that morning. Cute little bungalow house. And everything under the kitchen sink is out on her cabinets. They're on her cabinets. They're on her her eat-in kitchen table. They're on the floor. And she's never been married. She's a single mom of a college-age student that lives with her. And she just starts apologizing for all the chaos and everything. You know how we talk about everything but the kitchen sink? Well, everything but the kitchen sink literally was all spread out around her kitchen. And she's not a believer, but she loves the idea of Imago Dei, and we have had some deep conversations. And so I was able to share just from my heart and with all the joy in the world, this whole perception of not being able to, not having to apologize for the chaos, but to welcome people into your mess. Come into my mess. Come into my kitchen where my garbage disposal has just exploded hours before you got off your plane. And so that was a neat experience that I had to already use what our book is teaching us. So on page 7, our author says, hospitality, what is it really? When we overstress, overplan, and overthink inviting others into our lives and homes, hospitality becomes overwhelming to our souls. We become slaves to the expectations of others. We freeze at the mere thought of extending an invitation. Craving both perfection and polished perception, we fall victim to a cruel taskmaster. So how do we find the balance here? How do we open our door to the unknown without opening ourselves to dread and discouragement? It comes down to knowing the difference between entertaining and hospitality. Okay, so she says that if you're entertaining versus hospitality, and actually she quotes Martha Stewart, that the entertaining host seeks to elevate herself. This is not hospitality. Okay, now I know everyone out there has thought, I am not like that. I just want people to be comfortable. I just want to use the latest Pinterest picture, but I am not trying to elevate myself. And I hear you, because I have those thoughts as well. And it's easy for me to entertain. It's easy for me to throw some kind of centerpiece, and I love to have a pretty centerpiece. But if you think about it, this is all about a posture of your heart and what is at the core when you are entertaining or when you are being hospitable, when you're having your biblical hospitality. And she says that biblical hospitality begins with offering our best to God, and then we elevate the guest. This is when inviting someone in means offering our heart to another. And here is where God is calling me and where I am having a heart attitude change that I'm going to share with you today. I think that it's all about the posture of the heart and all about how we just come when we are going to entertain and be hospitable and welcome people in and do all the fun things that we like to do when we entertain, that we're going to seek him first, that we are going to give our best. We're going to offer our best to God and then open up our hearts, not just our home and our beautiful presentation, but really our heart. Our goal is to turn entertaining upside down and to begin to live a life of radical hospitality. Okay, so I think that needs to be everywhere in our thoughts as we ponder our study, as we continue to read. I think we need to have in our mindset that our goal is to turn this entertaining kind of thing upside down and begin to live radical hospitality. Throughout the scripture, both the Old Testament and the New Testament, we see where God instructs his people to welcome and love the stranger. We see it in Genesis with Adam and Eve and God and the hospitality offered there. We see him call Abraham to be hostess to stranger. You go into the New Testament and you see the apostles welcoming, opening up to others. We see Jesus and how he lived a life of interruption in order to be hospitable, and he didn't even have a home. Even on into Revelation, in the end times, it talks about how God will welcome, open up, and let us in. And she even quotes the scripture and reads the scripture out of Romans. She talks about Romans 12:13, but I backed up a little bit to see what it says before that. And it's under a section titled Love. And in my Bible, it says, love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need. And then the last part says practice hospitality. Now that word practice in other translations is actually the word pursue. And in the Hebrew, talking about pursue hospitality there. And so I was thinking about the word pursue and what are some things that we're interested in pursuing. Many of us have pursued a career or are pursuing a career. We might have pursued a husband. We have pursued having a more fit and healthy lifestyle or body. Maybe pursued being a wife, a better friend. You might have pursued being the mother of the year. I don't highly recommend trying to pursue that, but maybe that's been something you have pursued. God calls us in the scriptures to pursue hospitality. And on page 10, if you flip over there, she says, and she talks about some truths that she is learning and says, when I replay this truth about God's sufficiency in my heart, confident that he can transform lives in spite of me, all those over-the-top expectations go away. Because again, it's not about me. I have nothing to prove. He delights to work with my imperfections. If people are blessed and impacted, it's only because he is gracious to take a broken, weary, and unimpressive woman and use her desire for serving him to point others to Jesus in spite of herself. And so she ends this chapter with a challenge to us. She says, so this is it, my simple invitation to awaken your soul to the transforming power of what open door living can do when you step forward and you're willing to say, I'm willing and I'm available. Can you say, I'm willing and I'm available? So I can't help, at the end of each section, she has these things called like elevate the ordinary and then extra helping. And again, just to say that God is calling me to share the words that our author has shared and to come alongside of y'all and to come alongside of her story, I just could not resist to tell you about these things. So you may have noticed when you came in that I painted my doors since you were here last. Okay, this is the honest truth. 4 or 5 weeks ago, before I dove into this book, I was obviously starting to think about Bible study, but this was when we started, it's probably longer than that ago, when we started doing our work on our deck, which is 8 weeks ago. But I asked Brian if we could paint our doors. So then I'm in the plane with my daughter, and I'm like, oh my goodness, listen to this, Brinley. She's talking about just little ways that you can help yourself to enjoy this entertaining and elevating the ordinary. And she says, maybe be bold and give the door a fresh new paint color. You won't believe the difference it makes. So as soon as our plane landed in Florida, I hate to say it, but I said, Brinley, can I use my phone now? I got on the phone and I said, honey, and my sweet husband, he supports me so well. I said, Bible study is in 2 weeks. No, by then it was a week, sorry. Bible study is in a week. I said, and I have got to have those doors painted before Bible study. It's a long story, I can't explain it all to you now, but God has called me to paint the doors for a tangible illustration of how we can entertain. Biblical hospitality is calling me to paint my doors. Well, anyway, we got the doors painted just for an illustration to show you. Those doors, the paint cost about $50. And the stain on them is the stain that we've also used on our cabinetry in here. And recently we used it to stain a bookshelf for my daughter's new apartment. And so we had the stain. Now, I know a lot of times the labor can be the problem, and Brian and I had planned to do it ourselves. We ran out of time there, but so we had to get some of his employees to do it. But just to show you that I love that I have painted these doors and I can welcome you in. Her other little idea in there, my favorite way to greet guests is by personalizing a message to them on this huge chalkboard I made. Okay, now many of y'all know, my first chalkboard that I started writing personal messages, and my mother has told me many times, Tina, you should take a picture of every message you write, what a story it would tell. Because I have had all kinds of messages on there for all kinds of people. But that chalkboard in my kitchen with a little rabbit chalkboard has been there for 16 and a half years when we first bought this house. And I don't know about y'all, but I didn't see a whole lot of chalkboards in people's homes. I'm seeing them now. I see where everybody is jumping on this idea, and I love it. I have another chalkboard that welcomes you into my foyer, which was given to me for my 40th birthday. That chalkboard has a long history to it. It is from a restaurant that closed that was special to me in Charlotte, where I grew up, and my godparents got that for me for my 40th birthday. So just saying that I love these connections, and that I truly have already lived these things and know how beautiful and wonderful some of these things are. Which leads me to the extra helping, the open door invitation. Now this has been our life. This has been a life that Brian and I have chosen long before I read this in this book. In fact, I have used it as an illustration in Bible study before. But we do not lock our doors. We've never locked our doors. Really almost since we've been married, we just don't lock our doors. Now, I heard something when I was in college, and I just took it to heart. Now, I want to preface this by saying I'm not calling you to leave your door unlocked, because I do not want to be responsible if someone breaks into your house or whatever. So you do you, but I'm explaining to you my story and how this has affected my life. But I once heard that locks were made to keep honest people out, because thieves are going to break in anyway, right? But if you want to drop a casserole off for me, and my door is locked, and you don't have a cooler, you don't have anywhere to put that casserole. If my door is unlocked, you can come on in and put that casserole in my kitchen. If you need to borrow something from me, and I'm not home, and you want to shoot me a little text, I can say, go on in, the door is open. And so honest people are kept out when our doors are locked. Now I will tell you, a few years ago, we were robbed and had over $6,000 worth of things taken. It rocked my world, and many of you have been violated in such a way, and it does change you to your core. And the things that I didn't get back were things that had not as much, they had monetary value, but really it was the memories or something that was attached to that and the person. And you know what we started doing? My husband and I started locking the doors. We were locking our doors tight. Every door, every window, we were locking the doors. And we did this for about 2 weeks. And funny enough, we both kind of came to this conclusion at the same time that that was not the Parkers. and that we had never locked our doors, and we weren't going to start locking our doors because it was like putting us in bondage, and it was not allowing us to heal from the violation that had occurred. And honestly, locking the doors wouldn't have mattered anyway because it was somebody who worked for us and had known us for a long time. And you know, I know somebody in Charlotte even, they didn't lock their doors and they got robbed. You know, the thief went through the window. I mean, just saying. Also in this section, she just talks about being open to having people in your home. And I sat and tallied on my book right here in the airplane that we've been married for 26 years, and in 26 years of marriage, we have had 18 people live with us. 18 different people for different reasons. Missionaries, wayward family members, wayward children, people in transition, but we have opened our home and had 18 people live with us. So let's go to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called the Trickle Down chapter. Now, I am not so sure that I think that should be the name of it, because what I really felt like this chapter was about how you don't know in a moment when that moment can be a life-changing moment, whether it's a life-changing moment for you or a life-changing moment for the person you have extended biblical hospitality to. And so, the moment when God sets friendship into motion is a lot of what she talks about. And maybe you don't realize some of your moments where you became dear friends with somebody. And I have lots of close friends, but there are 3 moments I want to share with you that I knew that there was a jump, a click in my spirit when they happened, and I have been able to see in fruition what these friendships mean to me. You don't always get that case in a moment, and in this trickle-down theory, but when I saw Gwen Smithdale for the first time, she, as you may not know her, but she does do our nighttime study, and she's been with Imago Dei since the existence, and one of the founding fathers or mothers, if you want to call it. And I was in a fellowship hall where there was a large Sunday school class, and I had just had our first child, and I was rocking her with my little foot. You know, her little car seat was sitting on the floor, and I was rocking her. And I turn around, and I catch a glimpse of Gwen, and she's looking into the fellowship hall. I believe later I learned she was looking for her husband, and she was way pregnant. Now, of course, we didn't know it at the time, but I looked at her, and something leapt within my spirit. And I said, wow, look at that beautiful pregnant woman. I said, I wonder when she's due. I bet our babies are close to the same age, but something inside of me, it changed. And now she had a girl, and I had a girl, and my daughter was born that November. Hers was born in May. But we have done life together. I had no idea when that moment leapt into that moment that what it would mean for reaching out in hospitality and extending my love to her. And in fact, we really didn't solidify our friendship until I was having some miscarriages, and Gwen brought a coffee cake to me after I had been in the hospital. And that was kind of where it all began. And then our next 2 children, her last and my second, were born 7 days apart, and both boys. And so we had been able to do life together. But I just think about that moment, and I felt it. It was different. I knew that there was something special about that moment the first time I laid eyes on her. Another friend is my friend Tammy, who actually introduced me to this book. And when we first started Imago Dei, so that was 2005, another friend, when we were calling around and getting interest about people who might be interested in this kind of Bible study, the spirit, soul, and body, and the image being made in Christ, and women, and fitness, and another friend of mine gave me Tammy's phone number, and she said she's going to be moving to the area. She lives in Kernersville, but I think she would love this. And I remember sitting in my playroom upstairs where many of our morning ladies have taken their kids to childcare, and Tammy and I having our first conversation, me calling her out of the blue to ask if she wanted to be a part of Imago Dei, which she did and was and has been for many years. And I would not have known all the things, but I knew in my spirit then that something had clicked. And, I've had the opportunity, we've obviously talked about Tammy before, and you've heard my stories about walking with her through some things, but we were on the football field together, we were at school together, we've done Imago Dei together, we have done life together. Her son and her second son and my oldest son, you know, have been lifelong best friends, just inseparable, you know, the bromance thing. Just a beautiful picture illustration of friends and family and love. And that is when you never know the moment that God is going to set something into motion that is born out of biblical hospitality. The last thing I want to share is that a girl named Carrie, who I didn't think I had time to be friends with. I love it when God does that to you. But she kept reaching out to me, and I kept being like, I do not have time for another friend. Isn't that the craziest thing you've ever heard? I had no idea at that time that the Lord would give me Imago Dei and give me so many friends that I couldn't even count the numbers, and how blessed and fortunate I am for that. But now Carrie kept reaching out to me, and we were training for a marathon together, and we were in a marathon training group together, but I was not interested in any other close friends. But she kept reaching out. In fact, the first time she had us over for dinner at her house, I got the stomach bug, and before I had left her house, I was vomiting, had diarrhea. It was the worst thing in the world, but she kept trying, believe it or not. And do you know, I led her to the Lord. I led her to the Lord. She did not know Jesus. She didn't even own a Bible. And in that time, we were also able to keep her children, who never went to anyone's house to stay, send them to a marriage conference to heal their marriage. And I have lost contact with her. God can bring us back together again, that doesn't matter. But just, I would have never known the trickle down that would have happened. And I almost missed that one. On page 17, she says, and while we were made to belong to one another, this core extension of ourselves has been lost in modern society. Somehow we've dressed up this simple desire together, and we've laced it with imposing expectations and the pressure of performance. We've packed the calendar so full of busyness that it's created unnecessary bondage, making the concept of margin merely a myth. Why have we made community so difficult? And how do I help bring back what's been lost? And that is something that we have tried to do at Imago Dei. You know, we have some mottos, some creeds, and one of them is just come. Just come. You are welcome. If you own a Bible, if you don't own a Bible, if you love to exercise, if you don't love to exercise, if you just need the exercise part, or maybe you just need the fellowship part, or maybe you need to hear the word, just come. And we started years ago, our second Bible study book, I think, was the Captivating Bible Study. I used to say it at the beginning of every Bible study. For years I did this. But we started using the quote taken from Captivating by John and Stacey Eldridge, and we've always put it on the bottom of our syllabus. But this is the quote, and maybe it's something you want to consider adding into your life and into your family, or maybe using it as your family's creed. You're wanted here. I want to know you. Come in. Share yourself. Be enjoyed. Enjoy me as I share myself. Just come. Don't wait until you're ready to swing your doors wide open. Just swing them open in the midst of life. Now, I've told you that the study wasn't necessarily for me, right? About opening, if you just look at it in the part about opening your physical doors of your home, because that is easy for me, and that's something that I have been gifted with. But for me, it has absolutely been more about a posture of my heart. And if you turn over to page 21, she says something that hit me and struck a chord in me, and I know that this was my issue too. She's talking about a moment that brought her to a place where she said, I beg the Lord to awaken my heart once again, to sensitize my spirit to the needs of those around me, to guide me in the rediscovery of hidden gems of hospitality where I'd become complacent. And he has. I'm tuned in, I'm listening, I'm alert. And that's where I've been, with a heart of complacency about a lot of things. And one of the ways I had been complacent about the message of Imago Dei, the mission that God has given me and trusted to me. And the only way I can describe it to you outside of Imago Dei is, you know, our son Tate was healed supernaturally at Brenner's. And not everybody in modern cultural medicine, I think, gets to see this kind of healing. We see a lot of healing. God heals through medicine. God heals people's cancer. God heals marriages, hearts. God does amazing things in your day that you thought would be impossible to get done, and God does it. So we see it all the time. But we literally saw an amazing, miraculous healing. And so when Tate came out of the hospital after that healing, I told everybody who wanted to know. Let me just tell you, you might have not wanted to hear about it, but I was going to tell you. If I had his little car seat in the Walgreens and somebody said, what a cute baby, I would say, let me tell you about that baby. And I would tell his story of healing. All over the place, everywhere, every time my mouth opened. Our Christmas card that year told the story of his healing. And somewhere along the line, I grew complacent about that. And I have, over the years, done more sharing of that, and then, I'll kind of trail off. Tate was in middle school, and one of his science teachers called me and was like, or stopped me in the hallway and said, I want to tell you a story that Tate told us. And she told me that he'd shared his story of his healing. And I was just dumbfounded and just blessed me so. But I had come that way about the message of Imago Dei. I used to, whenever I had the opportunity to open these lips, open this mouth around a woman, be it any age, I would tell them about the ministry, tell them how God had called me and other women to seek his heart for his women, to teach us how to make our images look more like his through spirit, soul, and body. I told everyone. And for a variety of reasons, I have come to a place where I realize that I'm just really complacent about it. So I had just read this book, right? And when we were coming back from the Florida trip, the hurricane was coming. And anyway, long story short, I got stuck in the airport for a few hours. I wasn't taking the last leg to Raleigh. The plane that really was taken on to Raleigh was stuck on the runway due to the weather, and we didn't want to leave because we were afraid that she might get stranded in Charlotte, and it would just be easier for us to bring her back here. And then Brian was stuck because of all the traffic. He couldn't get to the airport. I ended up being there for a couple hours after the plane landed. So I decided I was going to go, sit down, but my phone was on 1%, and so I had to get it charged, in order to be able to communicate with my family. So I was worried about it. And I was going by all those bars, and people seemed to be just partying. They might have been starting a hurricane party early, but it was like a loud, and that wasn't what I was in the mood for. And my outfit looked ridiculous, which is another long story about I changed my shoes. And anyway, didn't feel like going into a restaurant with a bunch of people having drinks. So there was this one little bar type place, like kind of out in the open. I think it served sushi. You might have seen it. It's in the Charlotte airport. And so I went over to them and I asked if they had a place where I could plug up my phone. Well, there were several tables that I could sit by myself, be alone, but none of them had a charger. And so she said, you've got to get into the bar, and it's underneath, like underneath this table. You can't see it, but that's where the plugs were. Well, they weren't on the end cap of the bar, on the sides. It was just in the straightaway of the bar. And so lo and behold, I had to pull my little self up and all my luggage and all my new packages in between this man and this woman. And I was not super happy about it. It was tight quarters. And she was on a phone call having the time of her life discussing that. And he just looked like he wanted to be somewhere else. And he looked irritable. And so I just was not happy about my position there. But God had put me there after I read this. And it would take me too long to tell you the detail of our conversation. This woman was fine. I think she was from Colorado, but flying to California, then to Chicago. But oddly enough, she was separated from her husband, who went to East Carolina, where I went to school. I was talking about my son. Anyway, it ended up that we got into this deep conversation. I shared with her the mission of Imago Dei. I went back to God and our images being made. She was a fitness guru. She was all about the look, gorgeous woman, very fit, but was lost and was opening up to me about how lost she was in this world, about what was going to satisfy her. And it seemed like she had everything in the world. And anyway, the conversation was beautiful. Now, I can tell you, before I opened this book that we are studying, I'm 100% sure that I would not have shared about Imago Dei in the ministry. Now, I might have dropped some relational, seeker-friendly Christian jargon, because that's what I do. I do that when I'm around, just to get out a little word, get a little bit of God in there whenever I'm talking to anybody. But this was different. I opened up with biblical hospitality right in the airport and shared. And I know, I may never know. I gave her the website and everything. I may never hear from that woman again, but I know I had planted a seed and God had called me there. And it was because we had read this book that we had started on this journey of biblical hospitality. So the last chapter. The first couple of chapters are encouraging us just to start, right? Just to start thinking about biblical hospitality and what that means. This chapter is encouraging us to be okay with do-overs. And I love that. And she tells such a cute story about her son sabotaging her dip with the really, really hot peppers, and for a group of women too. And my kids have never done that, but they have definitely done other things. And so I love what she says at the end of that little story on page 27, because this is so true about not just my family, but anyone who would be watching me while I am opening up my heart and my home. She says, if they're, talking about her family, going to embrace open door living, I never want them to associate welcoming others into our heart and home with a crazed mother who loses it for the sake of pursuing hospitality. I do want them observing a mom who loves others well, sometimes messes up her priorities in the process, yet wants to keep giving it another try. And she goes on to say that whenever do-overs present themselves, I run for the opportunity. Life is too short not to embrace them. There's nothing like the newfound gratitude of grace that comes from second chances, mixed with an anticipation of new beginnings. And you know, that next little bit, a lot of you texted me and asked if that was Tammy's story, and it is, that Jen, our author, has shared about with Tammy. And I love that. And at this season too, as we remembered Riley yesterday, the day he went home to be with the Lord. But another do-over that I was thinking about is, have any of you grown women who love Jesus and love your friends dearly, have you ever had a big old argument with one of those said friends? Well, I'm going to talk about my friend Gwen again. We spent a full 24 hours of a beach trip mad at one another. It's the silliest thing. I can even remember what the argument was about. We had made a deal as to when our children were going to go to bed, and we had a long conversation about it, and all the parents agreed, and they were going to bed at such and such a time. Well, I put mine in bed, this particular child, her son, they're the same age, and he's in there just playing cards to beat the band with all the other people. And I said, take to bed, and Tate's saying, why is Foss in there playing? And she said, well, I decided Foss can stay up. Well, instead of just letting Tate get out of bed, I got raving. We got mad. I was frustrated that she had backed out of that plan. I'd already got my kids in bed. And anyway, it turned into a full-blown argument, and this is the craziest thing. And we stayed mad for 24 hours. It was a terrible 24 hours. But we did reconcile. And I loved, I have to admit, Gwen was probably the one that started the reconciliation. I'm just saying. But she's a crier, I'm not. And she's just crying to beat the band. Crying. I mean the ugly cry. All this. And I said, we were already done. We'd already apologized. We both said we were sorry. And I was like, why are you still crying? And she said, because we have lost 24 hours together at the beach. And I just was like, it hadn't even occurred to me. And I was like, oh my gosh. I love that she said that, and that she felt that, and that it was so sad to her that we had lost 24 hours of time in our lives. And she was exactly right. Wasted, because life is too short. We wasted that time on a silly argument. But fortunately, that was probably more than 10 years ago, and we have had 19, I think, beach trips together with our families. And so we've had lots of do-overs. On page 28, she says, I'm giving myself permission to loosen up, to be fun and crazy for the sole reason that I'm over the top loved by my Savior. And I shared with you in the intro about Tammy and how I came to this book, and y'all walked some with me through the journey when Tammy was sitting right here just days before in Imago Day with us before her son passed away. And in fact, that next Thursday, after her son died on Saturday, she was supposed to bring snacks that Thursday. And I just remember us fixing that situation. I can tell you things that I have been able to learn in walking beside Tammy because I've had that privilege too. But sometimes there are lessons that are learned when you're living in them and not just read them in a book. And one of those lessons she talks about in the book on page 28 is no regrets. She says, by implementing the power of the do-over, earlier annoyances turn into holy moments. Grumbling becomes gratitude. Formerly big things slip harmlessly away into obscurity. No regrets. Leave the past behind and focus on being intentional with your next steps. And I can tell you that many of you walked with me on my journey with my dad and his cancer and the death of cancer. And no regrets, those two words became a motto for our family after that. My dad had so many regrets. And I knew he'd struggled with his life choices. That was all revealed when I had a cancer scare and had pre-cancer. And anyway, I was not on talking terms with my dad at that time, but my sister and I drove to the mountain to tell him he'd lost both sisters to cancer. Anyway, I can see now the trickle down where God was putting things into place. But even after such restoration and redemption and spoken forgiveness, my dad had such regrets up until his last breath. It was so painful for him. He knew I'd forgiven him after a really unfortunate diagnosis towards the end in the hospital that was difficult to take. He knew I'd forgiven him. And I said, through his tears, I said, Dad, I've forgiven you. And so I said, and God has forgiven you. And he said, he knew that. He knew God had forgiven him, and he had forgiven himself. Or he knew I'd forgiven him. But he could not forgive himself. It was truly heart-wrenching to witness the wrestling that my dad had in those last days. But what I've tried to capitalize on in honor of my dad and with my kids concerning their grandpa who watched him wrestle with that in the end, we all have regrets, poor choices we've made. We are humans living in a fallen world, but you do not have to hang on to regrets. Life is way too short and fragile for that. Our author ends our chapter with urging us in life and in open door living with our hearts to choose a posture of what we get to do and not what we have to do. Odd that my pastor shared the very same message this weekend, so I trust that Holy Spirit wants us to grasp this beautiful concept. And on page 29, we read that our author says to us, let's switch to page 30. The greatest of all do-overs is one we get to experience every day as followers of Jesus, natural-born rebels rescued from the guilt and shame of our sin by forgiving mercy and grace of God. He has given us, because of his abundant, faithful love for us, the ultimate do-over. You know, there's so many stories I have. I was once with little kids, just like many of you are, and mine are growing up now, but I look back on my life and the times that I just did a do-over or that I just chose to just live fully with life open were times like when the sing-off was a show and we loved it, and we would have the kids stay up late and the cousins would come over and we would watch this sing-off and the kids would get to go to bed way late, and I look back and that was fun. And I remember like the few times that we just took the kids out of school for some random family trip, and they still graduated from high school and one from college now. And then I remember a 16-hour road trip where right in the middle of it had been 8 hours, had 8 hours to go, that we decided to go to some obscure town that was advertising some little traveling circus or zoo. And I remember how fun that was. And I'd be remiss not to mention taking a group of middle school girls at the end of their middle school years where we had done so many Bible studies with them. Gwen and I took them on a surprise trip to the beach. We truly surprised them to wash their feet in the ocean at the end of that study. I have not always made all the right choices when it comes to parenting, but we are the parents who always say yes to friends coming over. Any number is okay. And when my nephew calls and says, can his friend and his friend's energetic dog, can they come to escape the hurricane and stay at our house? The answer is yes, of course. And when we say sure to a friend coming on a family trip or extra stopping by our beach house vacation, but that turns into way more than you expected, we just pray that it expands the food, that God expands the food and the sleeping space, and most importantly, that He expands our heart. This is our way to love the Lord with all our hearts and our neighbor as ourselves. And finally, we end on this page that screams Imago Dei, page 31. The culture screams produce, accomplish, succeed. So we jump in and strive and reach and grab, all in the attempt to do more, be more, and make more. Comparison stranglehold plays games with our self-image, so we build our identity on others' expectations, rubbing against God's view of us. Beloved, cherished, and worthy. Our feelings, though valuable gifts that help us experience life, are notoriously horrible captains. If we allow altered emotions to steer us, it's a crashing waiting to happen. Wholeheartedly loving God and believing the truth that He loves us infinitely more than we can ever imagine requires that we anchor our feelings in His Word and be careful watch over what fills our hearts and minds. He knows if He's captivated our hearts, He'll have control of everything else too. Only with a heart fully allowed to Him, one that dances in the freedom He offers and celebrates the abundant life as someone who knows they're truly loved, can His next commandment even sound possible. And that is to love others. And on 32, she stole Imago Dei's tagline. No joke. This has been our tagline for so many years. And that is, she says, oh friend, I want my love for God and His love for me to spill out to those around me in such a tangible way that they can't help but wonder what makes me different. And I wore this shirt today. I hope the video will let you see it. And Karen can just tell you. Can you read it? Can you see what it says? That has been Imago Dei from almost the existence, is don't you want to be different? Don't you want your biblical hospitality to reach out to that around you and say, what is it about that woman? What makes her different? And I want a part of that, and that's Jesus.